She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just set my suitcase on the front porch of the house I helped design, looked me in the eye, and said, "You need to leave. I can't have someone I don't trust living under my roof." That sentence played on a loop in my head the entire drive to my brother's apartment on the east side of Phoenix. My dress shirts folded inside a bag I'd packed in 12 minutes while she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, already certain I was guilty. The thing that's going to destroy you when you hear this story isn't what she did. It's why she did it, and who told her to. My name is Everett Callahan. I'm 44 years old. I'm a licensed civil engineer with 20 years of experience working on transportation infrastructure across the greater Phoenix metro area. Bridges, highway expansions, drainage systems for a city that has no business existing in the middle of a desert. I am not a dramatic man. I am not a man given to grand gestures or emotional speeches. I am the kind of man who reads contracts before signing them, who double-checks load calculations 3 times before approving a design, who shows up early, stays late, and doesn't complain about either. I thought those qualities made me a good husband. Turns out they just made me easy to underestimate. And for 3 weeks after Nadine threw me out of our home, on the strength of her sister's word alone, I sat with that truth and let it sharpen itself into something I'd never felt before. Not anger, not grief, not desperation. Clarity. If this story is already hitting close to home, stay with me. Hit that subscribe button right now and leave a comment below. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do by someone who was supposed to love you? I want to hear it. And don't forget to like this video because this story is only getting started. Nadine Whitfield Callahan was 38 years old, the CEO of a mid-size commercial real estate development firm called Whitfield & Associates that her father had built from scratch on the north side of Scottsdale. She took it over at 32 when her father's health declined, and she had doubled the company's annual revenue by 35. She was brilliant. She was relentless. She had a way of walking into a room that made everyone else feel like they'd arrived slightly underdressed for an occasion they didn't know was formal. I met her at a city planning commission meeting in 2016. I was presenting infrastructure requirements for a mixed-use development on the Loop 101 corridor. She was the developer pushing the project. We argued for 40 minutes in front of the commission about storm drain capacity, and she never once blinked. I asked her to dinner that same evening because I'd never met anyone who argued with me about storm drains with that kind of precision. We were married in 2019, in a ceremony at the Hermosa Inn in Paradise Valley. Her choice. Her family's money. Her guest list of 200 people, most of whom I'd never met before. My side of the church held my brother Garrett, my father Harold, 2 college friends, and 4 engineers from my firm who I'd told not to bring gifts. From the beginning, our lives had a particular geometry to it. Nadine's world was large and fast-moving. Mine was technical and methodical. We complemented each other in the way that 2 different materials can make a stronger composite structure than either one alone. What I didn't fully account for was the foundation. Specifically, I didn't account for her sister Brittany. Brittany Whitfield was 35, 2 years younger than Nadine, and she had never quite figured out what to do with herself. She'd started a lifestyle blog that got some traction for about 18 months, then pivoted to selling vintage clothing online, then pivoted again to becoming a wellness consultant, which appeared to mean she posted photographs of herself hiking Camelback Mountain at sunrise and charged $400 an hour for phone consultations that I never understood the content of. She lived 10 minutes from us in a condo that Nadine had helped her buy after her second divorce. She had dinner at our house most Sunday evenings. She borrowed Nadine's car without asking at least twice a month. She called Nadine at 11 o'clock at night to talk through problems that, as far as I could ever tell, had no practical solution because they weren't actually problems. They were Brittany performing distress, so that Nadine would perform concern. I never said any of that out loud. I am not the kind of man who tells his wife to choose between him and her family. But I am the kind of man who notices structural weaknesses. And Brittany was a structural weakness with excellent posture and a perfectly curated Instagram feed. She didn't like me. She was careful about it. Always polite enough on the surface, always making small jokes that could be passed off as affectionate teasing if anyone called them out. But I could see it the way you can see a hairline crack in a concrete column if you know what you're looking at. I was a threat to Brittany because I was the only person in Nadine's life who had ever told Nadine no when Brittany needed something. It started small. Nadine wanted to co-sign Brittany's lease on a retail space for a boutique she was planning to open. I pointed out that Brittany had 3 failed business ventures in 4 years, and asked what the contingency plan was if the boutique didn't cover its rent. Nadine paused and asked Brittany those same questions. The boutique never happened. Brittany never forgave me. It escalated slowly. A comment here, a suggestion there. Everett seems like he controls the finances. Did Everett approve of that? Always framed with a smile, always deniable, always landing in the soft tissue of Nadine's independence in a way that made her second-guess herself. What I didn't see coming was how efficiently Brittany could build a case. The lie had a very specific shape. In February of this year, Nadine's firm was in the middle of a complicated acquisition involving a commercial property portfolio in Tempe. The due diligence process was intensive. She was working 14-hour days and most weekends. I had my own pressure. My firm had just won a contract for a grade separation project on the I-10 near Chandler, and I was the project lead. We were both buried. We were both stressed. We were both, in hindsight, less present in our marriage than we should have been. That's when Brittany moved. I had a colleague named Priya, a transportation planner at the city with whom I had worked on 6 projects over 8 years. We had dinner once that month at Blanco Tacos on 24th Street to debrief on a public comment hearing that had run 3 hours over schedule. It was a working dinner. I paid. I told Nadine about it that same evening, the way I always mentioned when I had dinner with anyone from work, because I have nothing to hide and never have. Brittany was at Blanco Tacos that same evening. She didn't wave at me, didn't come over, just watched. What she did was take a photograph on her phone of Priya and me at the table, leaning toward each other over a set of project documents, talking in the way that people talk in loud restaurants when they need to be heard. And then she waited. She didn't show Nadine right away. She built a narrative first. Over 2 weeks, she planted quiet questions and conversations. Has Everett been working late a lot? How are things between you two? You seem tired. I just worry about you sometimes. She constructed a context before she provided the evidence, so that when she finally showed Nadine the photograph didn't need to do any work on its own. The context did all the work. Nadine came home on a Thursday evening. I was at the kitchen table reviewing drainage calculations with a highlighter and a cold cup of coffee. She set her phone on the table in front of me without saying anything. There I was. Blanco Tacos, Priya across the table, both of us leaning forward over paperwork. Brittany took this, Nadine said. Her voice was the kind of quiet that isn't actually quiet at all. She didn't want to tell me. She said she'd been sitting on it for 2 weeks because she didn't want to hurt me. I looked up at her. That's Priya. We had a work dinner. I told you about it the night it happened. You told me you had dinner with someone from the city office. I did. That's what I said. You didn't tell me it was a woman. I held the pause for 1 second because I needed to make sure I said this correctly. Nadine, in 15 years of being your colleague and 3 years of being your husband, I have never once given you a reason not to trust me. I told you I had a work dinner. I didn't specify that my colleague was a woman because it didn't occur to me that her gender was relevant information. She picked up the phone. She stared at the photograph for a long moment. She looks comfortable with you, Nadine said. And I understood then that this wasn't actually a conversation about the photograph. The photograph was just the delivery mechanism for something Brittany had been building for months, maybe longer. I'd like to call Priya right now, I said. You can hear the conversation yourself. She can tell you exactly what we talked about, which project documents were on the table, what we ordered, how long we were there. Is that what you need? I need you to tell me there's nothing going on. There is nothing going on. Priya is a transportation planner. We have worked together on infrastructure projects for 8 years. That is the entire scope of our relationship. She nodded slowly. She seemed to believe me. She went upstairs. I stayed at the kitchen table and sat with the feeling that something had shifted in the house. Something I couldn't measure or calculate, only sense the way you sense a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. I should have pushed harder that night. I should have had the harder conversation. But I didn't, because I thought the moment had passed. It hadn't passed. It had just gone underground, where Brittany could work on it more carefully. 3 days later, Nadine told me she needed space. I came home from work on a Monday and found my suitcase in the front hallway. Not packed by her. She'd left it to me to pack, which told me something about how certain she'd already become. She was standing at the kitchen island with a glass of wine and an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not anger, not sadness. Something colder than either. "Brittany showed me more," she said. I stood in the hallway next to my own luggage and waited. "She found messages between you and this Priya on your old work email." "What messages?" "Messages where you called her remarkable, where you said you wished you had more time together, where you told her that she was the most interesting person you'd worked with in years." I stood very still. "Nadine, I need to see those messages." "Brittany printed them." "Then I need to see the printouts." She slid a folder across the island toward me. I opened it. I read the messages. They were not my words. The format was right. The email header, the font, the company signature block. But the words weren't mine. The phrasing wasn't mine. I don't write like that. I don't think like that. Whoever had constructed these had done a decent job with the technical appearance, but had made a fundamental error. They didn't know how I actually speak or write. But I also understood immediately that telling Nadine, "Those aren't my words," was not going to be sufficient. Because the person who had told her they were my words was someone she had trusted her entire life. And I was, according to the story Brittany had told, someone whose trustworthiness was now in question. "These aren't real," I said. Nadine looked at me. "These emails were fabricated. I didn't write these. I don't write like this. I don't talk like this. You've known me for 7 years. Does this sound like me?" "Everett," she showed me the headers. "Headers can be faked. I'm a civil engineer, not a cybercrime investigator. But I know that email headers can be spoofed and screenshots can be edited. What I need you to do right now is ask yourself one question." I closed the folder. "In 7 years together, have I ever given you a single reason, not a suspicion, not a feeling, but an actual reason, to believe I would do this?" She didn't answer immediately. That pause was its own kind of answer. "I need time," she said finally. "How much time?" "I don't know. I need you to not be here right now so I can think clearly." I picked up my suitcase. I walked to the front door. I turned back one more time because I needed her to hear this. "Nadine, whatever Brittany told you, whatever she showed you, ask yourself why. Ask yourself what she gets out of this. And when you're ready to have a real conversation, call me." She didn't call me that night. She didn't call me the next day. I drove to my brother Garrett's apartment near the Piestewa Peak neighborhood and slept on his couch for the first of what would become 22 nights. Garrett is 2 years younger than me. He manages a commercial HVAC company on the west side, works with his hands, has been married to the same woman, Donna, for 15 years. He is not a man who deals in subtlety. When I showed up at his door with a suitcase and the controlled expression of someone trying not to fall apart, he looked at me for exactly 3 seconds and said, "Come in. Beer or something stronger?" "Just tell me what you think," I said. He handed me a beer. "I think your wife got played by her sister, and I think you're going to need a lawyer." I didn't want to believe it was that simple. I wanted to believe that Nadine would work through it, that she would come back to herself, that the woman I married, the one who argued about storm drain capacity with the precision of a seasoned engineer, would apply that same precision to the evidence she'd been presented and find it wanting. She didn't call for 11 days. On the 12th day, she texted, "Are you doing any reflecting on your behavior?" I stared at that text for 6 minutes. Then I put my phone down on Garrett's kitchen counter and said out loud to no one in particular, "There it is." She wasn't asking if I was okay. She wasn't asking if we could talk. She was asking if I had reflected on my behavior, meaning she had already decided that there was behavior to reflect on, that the trial had concluded in my absence, and that the appropriate next step was for me to perform contrition. I didn't respond that day. I called my attorney instead. David Ferris was someone I'd worked with once before on a contract dispute at my firm. He specialized in family law on the side of his practice, and he was the kind of attorney who listened twice as much as he talked, which is the mark of someone who understands that the most important information is almost always the thing the client doesn't know they know yet. I told him everything. The photograph, the emails, the suitcase, the text message. I also told him something I hadn't told anyone yet, because during those 11 days at Garrett's apartment, I hadn't been sitting still. I had been thinking about the emails Brittany had printed, and I had called Priya. Priya, to her enormous credit, was furious on my behalf. She had never sent those messages. She had never received those messages. We had a professional working relationship that she valued, and she was deeply troubled by what I'd described. More importantly, she was an IT professional's daughter who knew exactly what to do. She contacted the city's IT security department and asked them to pull the actual email logs from both her account and my work account for the relevant time period. The logs showed no such correspondence. Not deleted, not archived, simply absent. Because those emails had never been sent through either server. Priya sent me the IT department's written findings. I sent them to David. David read them, set down the papers, and said, "Everett, do you want to save this marriage or do you want to end it?" I took a long time to answer that question, because the real answer wasn't simple. The real answer was, I want the marriage I thought I had, but I don't think that marriage exists anymore. What I said out loud was, draw up the papers. The divorce filing landed on a Tuesday morning. I know exactly when it landed because Nadine called me 40 minutes after the papers were served, and I watched her name flash on my phone 3 times before I picked up. "What is this?" Her voice was different now. The cold certainty was gone. Something underneath it, something raw, had come to the surface. "It's divorce papers," I said calmly. "You asked me to reflect on my behavior. I did. I reflected on the behavior of being thrown out of my own home on the basis of fabricated evidence, and I reflected on what it means that you never once called me in 11 days to ask if any of it was actually true. And I reflected on the fact that when you finally did reach out, you asked me if I was sorry, which means you'd already decided I was guilty." I paused. That's what I reflected on, Nadine. Silence. "Everett, you'll find in the filing a document from the City of Phoenix IT Security Department confirming that the email correspondence Brittany showed you was never transmitted through my work account or Priya's account. You'll also find a notarized statement from Priya detailing the professional nature of our working relationship and confirming the subject matter of our dinner at Blanco Tacos in February, including the project documents we reviewed." I kept my voice steady. "Everything Brittany told you was a lie. I told you it was a lie the night you slid that folder across the island. You chose not to believe me." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Nadine said, "She would never. She already did." My voice stayed level. I had rehearsed this, not because I'm a calculated person, but because I had spent 22 nights on my brother's couch, understanding exactly what I needed to say, and refusing to let emotion dismantle it. Brittany fabricated those emails. I don't know if she screenshotted a real email thread and edited the content, or if she used a spoofing tool to generate fake headers, but either way, what she showed you was not real. And you had enough trust in her, and not enough trust in me to throw me out over it without a single question. "You need to give me a chance to—" "I gave you 11 days. She went quiet again. "I'll have my attorney be in touch with yours," I said. "I hope you're well, Nadine." I hung up. I sat in the parking lot of a coffee shop on McDowell Road, and I did not move for about 4 minutes. Then I went inside, ordered a large black coffee, opened my laptop, and went back to reviewing load calculations for the Chandler grade separation. Because the work doesn't stop, and neither do I. What happened next arrived to me in stages, mostly through Garrett, who still spoke to Donna, who had a mutual acquaintance in Nadine's social circle. Nadine had confronted Brittany the same afternoon she called me. According to what reached me secondhand, it was not a quiet conversation. Brittany's first move was denial. She hadn't fabricated anything. The emails were real. The IT department was wrong. Someone at the city was covering for me. Nadine was being manipulated. By me. By my lawyers. By Priya, who Brittany apparently suggested had her own motivations for protecting me. Then Nadine showed her the IT department's findings in writing, page by page. Brittany's second move was to cry, to say that she had been scared, that she genuinely believed she was protecting Nadine, that maybe she had misread something, that maybe the emails she'd seen had looked real to her in the moment. Nadine, according to what reached me, looked at her sister for a long time without saying anything. Then she asked one question. "Where did you get those emails, Brittany? If they didn't exist in any server, where did you find them?" And that question, the one with no clean answer, was where Brittany's narrative collapsed completely. She couldn't explain it. She tried 3 different versions of an explanation, and none of them held together under scrutiny, because Nadine Whitfield Callahan is not a woman who accepts an answer that doesn't account for the math. She built a company by asking exactly these kinds of questions. Brittany had underestimated the person she was trying to protect. What came out eventually, not all at once, but in fragments over the following days as Nadine pressed and pressed, was worse than I had expected. Brittany had been telling people in their social circle for over a year that my marriage to Nadine was unhealthy, that I was controlling, that I had isolated Nadine from friends and family. A particularly ironic accusation, given that the only person consistently driving a wedge into our marriage was Brittany herself. She had told at least 2 of Nadine's close friends that she was worried about her sister's relationship, had implied to their mother that there were concerning dynamics, had positioned herself as the vigilant protector while quietly constructing the conditions for Nadine to need protection. And the emails had been generated. Brittany wasn't a technical person, but she'd found someone online who was someone she'd paid to generate realistic-looking email correspondence with fabricated headers. When I learned that detail, I felt something I rarely feel. Genuine cold fury. Not at what had been done to me, but at the precision of it. This wasn't an impulsive lie. This was architecture. I want to tell you that when Nadine called me 2 days after that confrontation, I felt something clean and clear. I want to tell you it was simple. It wasn't simple. She called me on a Thursday morning while I was on site in Chandler, standing on a temporary access road next to a massive concrete form that was being prepped for pouring. I stepped away from the crew and answered because her name on my phone still did something I hadn't managed to stop yet. "I owe you something I don't have words for," she said. I said nothing. "Everett, I owe you an apology that I'm not sure I know how to give." Her voice sounded different from the last conversation, smaller, in a way I'd never heard from her. "I went to a doctor 2 years ago because I was having trouble sleeping, and she asked me what my biggest fear was, and I told her it was being left. I told her that my biggest fear in the world was building something and then watching it collapse. And I think Brittany knew that. I think she knew exactly which door to knock on." "She did," I said. "I should have believed you." "Yes, you should have." "Is there—" She stopped, started again. "Is there anything I can do?" I watched a construction crew 40 yards away wrestle a steel rebar cage into position inside the concrete form. I watched them work with the kind of focused precision that good work requires. They weren't talking to each other much. They didn't need to. They each knew their part. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm not saying no. I'm saying I don't know. What happened isn't something I can step around. You threw me out of my own house. You didn't call me for 11 days. You texted me asking if I'd reflected on my behavior. I need time to understand what that means about us. Not about Brittany, but about us. About what you believed about me when it counted." She said, "I understand." And then she said something I hadn't expected. "I fired Brittany." I turned away from the job site. "She's been on the Whitfield and Associates payroll for 2 years, Nadine said. Wellness consulting, internal communications, client event coordination. I created positions for her because she needed them. I terminated her employment this morning. I also told her that I need distance from her for the foreseeable future, and that if she makes contact with you, I will proceed with legal action for the defamation and the fraudulent email generation." I stood on that access road in Chandler, Arizona, in the February sun, and I let that information settle. David Ferris is already looking at what a civil action might look like, I said. The IT documentation is solid. The damage to my professional reputation if those emails had circulated further. Brittany was planning to send them to my firm's leadership. We found that in her phone when Nadine's attorney requested records in the discovery process. I hadn't told Nadine about that part yet. She went quiet on the phone when I mentioned it. She was going to send them to your firm, Nadine said quietly. Not a question. Yes. Another long pause. Then this was never about protecting me, Nadine said. This was about destroying you. Yes, I said. That's what I think. The divorce papers are still active as I'm telling you this. David says I can withdraw them if I choose to. He doesn't advise one way or the other. He's a lawyer, not a marriage counselor. Nadine and I have spoken 4 times in the 2 weeks since that Thursday call on the Chandler job site. Once for 2 hours. She has been honest in a way that feels like she is taking something apart very carefully to understand how it was built wrong. I respect that process because I recognize it. It's the same process I use when I'm trying to understand why a structure failed. I don't know what the outcome looks like. I am not going to tell you we're fine, and that love conquers all, and that everything worked out. I am a civil engineer. I trust structures I can verify. I do not yet know if what we have left is load-bearing. What I know is this. I know that Brittany Whitfield, 35 years old, wellness consultant, Camelback Mountain sunrise photographer, is now employed by none of her family, is no longer speaking to her sister, is facing a potential civil lawsuit for defamation and fraud, and recently posted on her Instagram, which I do not follow, but which Garrett's wife Donna absolutely does, a cryptic caption about toxic environments and protecting your peace. The photograph was of a sunrise over the McDowell Mountains with a smoothie in the foreground. I know that the project documents Priya and I reviewed at Blanco Tacos that February evening were approved by the City Planning Commission. 3 weeks later, which means the work we did at that dinner was not just legitimate, but successful. I know that the grade separation on I-10 near Chandler is on schedule, that the concrete forms are holding, and that in approximately 8 months, drivers in the Phoenix metro area will have a safer, more efficient interchange because a team of people showed up and did the technical work carefully and without drama. And I know that when Nadine asked me on our 4th phone call what I needed from her, not what she could offer, but what I actually needed, I thought about it for a long time before I answered. What I said was, I need to know that if you're ever handed a piece of evidence about me again, your first call is to me, not your lawyer, not your sister. Me. That's the structure I need in place. Everything else we can build on top of that. She said, yes. I am not going to tell you that's enough. I'm still deciding. But I will tell you this. The man who packed a bag in 12 minutes and drove to his brother's apartment because his wife believed a lie did not stay broken. He went to work. He gathered evidence. He called his attorney. He filed the papers. He answered the phone when it mattered, and didn't answer it when it didn't. He did not perform grief for an audience, did not spiral into anger, did not give Brittany the satisfaction of watching him fall apart. He just stayed exactly who he has always been. And that, it turns out, was the most effective thing he could do. Because you can fabricate an email, you can photograph a work dinner, you can build a narrative over months with the patience and precision of someone who has nothing else to do. But you cannot fabricate 20 years of being exactly who you say you are. Brittany built her lie on the assumption that I was hiding something, and when they went looking for the thing I was supposedly hiding, they found nothing, because there was nothing there. The structure held. The foundation held. The house she tried to burn down is still standing. Some people, when they're at the lowest point, when someone they love throws them out based on a lie, when they're sleeping on a couch and eating takeout and staring at their phone waiting for a call that isn't coming, they think that's the end of the story. It isn't the end of the story. Sometimes being believed in is the only way to discover who actually believes in you. And sometimes the person who tried hardest to destroy you ends up being the one who showed you, for free, every structural weakness in your life that you needed to address. I did not ask to learn any of this. I did not ask to spend 22 nights on Garrett's couch. I did not ask to have my marriage nearly dismantled by a woman who photographs sunrises for a living and calls it a career. But here I am, 44 years old. Civil engineer. Standing on solid ground. That's the only kind of ground I know how to build on.